And then he starts a new section where he talks about lata'if and these subtle points. And his constant mode of address, he says, "I'lam ayyuha dhaki." Know, oh you intelligent one. And then he goes off onto this kind of a tirade against the Arab rulers, that they are people who don't pay attention. They never bothered to study the signs of Allah. And because of that, they have weak faith. And because of that weak faith, their relationship with the Muslims in general and other Muslim rulers in particular is not good. And so you have all of these rulers of the Muslims fighting each other over trifling matters. And you contrast that with European leaders who, in his opinion, are able to sit down and work out their differences. Of course, a few years later, the European leaders ended up fighting World War II and immersing the whole world in their problems. But he doesn't seem to see that, what had just happened in World War I as a feature of their methodology or their characters. So he kind of, he puts the Europeans up as an example of what the Muslim leaders should be doing. And then another point that he makes is that making use of natural resources is only possible if you study nature. And because the Arab leaders don't do that, then they're unable to make any contribution to material culture. In that regard, I'll read you a quote. He said, "There can be no madda, no material." From that, I understand culture. There can be no material culture except where there is truthfulness, justice, and thought. And material culture manifests in accord with that thought. I'm adding the word thought. So this occurs on one of two bases. Either religion, by which people are reminded of the attributes of the believers, the five mentioned here, and others as well, or on the basis of pure intellect, as a great number of European rulers have agreed. Some rulers of the Muslim East have derived no share from either wisdom, meaning science, or the religion. For that reason, they fight over the pettiest matters, while the Europeans around them laugh at them behind their backs. Summun bukmun umyun fahum la yarji'un. Deaf, blind, and dumb, so they don't return. Of course, that's a quote, which is a reference to hypocrites in the Qur'an. And then he moves on to the second subtlety when he's talking about tawakkul. And basically his point is that tawakkul doesn't mean kicking back and just leaving it to Allah. You put your faith and your hope in Allah, and you do your best to work efficiently, proficiently, to do your work well, and to just kick back and ignore the necessity of working hard. That people who do that and say we're putting our trust in Allah are deluded. And unfortunately, that's the condition of a great number of Muslims of the contemporary era. And then his third point, the verse indicates that acts of the heart have precedent over acts of the body. And then he says, ignorance is a flaw of the heart, and one of its major causes among modern Muslims is their turning away from the signs of Allah in the natural world. And then he goes on to repeat himself about making use of natural resources based upon studying nature, and the Arab leaders are deficient because they don't study the signs of Allah in nature, and therefore they're unable to harness nature to produce wealth, and so they end up fighting over the trivial wealth that their cultures do end up producing based upon their limited knowledge. And then he proposes a remedy for this state of affairs that, these are essential points. knowledge must be spread about the wonders of this world. And number 2, souls must be refined until they feel awe of their Lord. And this awe is engendered by being reminded by the Quranic verses and the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ that instill fear of Allah's vengeance and his seizure of wrongdoers. And salat must be established and wealth spent in what pleases Allah. That's point number 3. He says all of these refine the soul, but the most important of them is the spread of contemporary knowledge. And then he starts a new section on the wisdom embodied in these verses. And he starts to sort of approach a whole issue of epistemology. How do you know that this revelation, that this text, which claims to be revelation from Allah, really is revelation? And he starts to sort of approach it, and then he just sort of veers away. And he goes back to reviewing the connection between Surah Al-A'raf and Surah Al-Anfal. And he makes the point that at the end of Al-A'raf there's advice to the believers. First, that they should forgive the ignorant and refrain from being led by Satan into this hardening into a sort of an attitude of enmity with others. The second point, that they should listen to the Qur'an and be silent in order to do so. And third, that they should remember that one should remember one's Lord inside oneself and with contemplation and awareness, muraqabah. And then he says, this naturally links up with Surah Al-Anfal, because you have an echo of these points in the 3 internal qualities of the believers. First of all, that that when Allah is mentioned, first of all that they're advised to repair relations between themselves, to make relations good. So that's related to that whole idea of forgiveness and avoiding the goading of shaitan that would harden a person into getting locked into a situation of being an enemy, especially to another believer. And then the fact that when Allah's name is mentioned, that their hearts tremble, that's linked to the muraqabah, to remembering Allah within oneself in the morning and the evening. And then that the mention of the increase in faith from hearing the verses of Allah, the ayat of Allah, that's of course linked to when the Qur'an is being recited, that you listen and be quiet. Not only that you don't speak with your tongue, but that you try to still your mind and become receptive to it. So, that's you see this, that he does have a fair amount of concern with this, the whole idea of munasabah, how do surahs relate to each other, and their thematic coherence. And then, as far as the overall theme of Al-Anfal and the Tawbah, he says, there's a point here which only came out with the developments of recent history, and that's sort of an indication of a miracle in the arrangement of the Qur'an. And it's basically something that he already talked about, but Al-A'raf is a warning, and then Al-Anfal and At-Tawbah are addressing Muslims as an up-and-coming power, and that Allah is promising them victory. And then Yunus and Hud talk about oppressive transgressors and warns not to be like that. So he said Al-A'raf doesn't deal with that prohibition of oppression and tyranny. It comes in the surahs that follow these two surahs in which Allah promises the Muslims victory. So it's as if Allah is saying that if I put you in power, then don't be tyrannical oppressors. And if you do, then what happened to those people, those bygone nations that I told you about in Surah Al-A'raf, it'll happen to you. And so he said, well, this is what happened, that, the Muslims, they got locked into this situation where the Khilafah turned into kingship, and the kings were only interested in maintaining their own power and living lives of luxury, and Shura was abandoned as a principle by which the society was ruled. There was no consultation with the governed regarding affairs that affect everybody. And so when all of that happened, and then, of course, when the Muslims stopped studying science, they no longer became fit to lead the world, and then Allah took away power from them. And so this is, in his view, the miraculous arrangement of the surahs give us this forecast of what happened to the Muslims. So that's his diagnosis, and then his cure. He said, we have to get back to, or we have to get to a way of approaching the study of the Qur'an. Children, when they memorize anything in the Qur'an, that it should be linked up with natural science. So, for instance, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا. When a child memorizes those lines, the teacher should draw a picture of the sun and explain to the child all about the sun and what's happening on the sun and how the sun's light, it makes plants grow, and that's, the ancient plants turned into coal, and the sun energy drives the water cycle and the winds, and so all of these kind of aspects of how the sun is so beneficial to us, child should be made aware of these things, so that the love of learning about the world is instilled in their hearts at a young age, and they become individuals that will want to study nature when they become adults. And so this is much better than having children just memorize these words and sounds and they become like parrots. So that's basically his main prescription for how to fix the situation. And then he says that anybody who reads his tafsir, he says, you and I and anybody who reads his tafsir has a duty to try to make this knowledge, to spread education among the Muslims. This is the answer. And he goes off into a tangent that seems tendentious at best, where he talks about these 5 qualities of faith, and then he mentions the hadith that Iman consists of some 60 or 70 branches, and he says the verse doesn't say innamal mu'min, doesn't talk about the believer as in the singular case, uses the plural term for innamal mu'minun, verily the believers are those. And then he tries to link that plural with the whole idea of Iman having 70 branches. And he says that that verse only mentions 5 qualities, whereas the hadith as an indication. It talks about the highest branch is to say La ilaha illallah. The lowest branch is to remove a harmful thing from the road, and haya, shyness or modesty, is a part of Iman. So he said what that indicates is that every aspect of life comes into Iman. So he links that with Fard Kifaya, that all of the knowledges that are necessary to run a society, they're part of Iman. Carpenters and blacksmiths and even street sweepers and the guys who clean out the sewers, that all of these skills and these professions are necessary to run a society, therefore they're a part of Iman. And it's a kind of a weird, to me, tangent. So he says, if you have a society where all these things are present, then it's anyone who's in a society like that, it's as if their Iman has been completed, and because they share in the completion of the Fard Kifaya duties, the communal obligations for the society as a whole, and so when that's complete for the society, anyone in that society is part of that collective mu'minun, who are the real believers. Is a very strange argument. Anyway, it should be pointed out that in Saudi Arabia, when that book came out somewhere long ago, that the Saudis decided that this tafsir is just too weird, heretical, has strange ideas, and so they banned it in Saudi Arabia. I didn't see anything in it from my very surface look at it that would merit banning it, although I didn't agree with some of his ideas, but that's a point worth noting. I don't know if it's still banned in Saudi Arabia or not.